for this socially distanced workshop for the Page County zoning ordinance. So thank you all for coming tonight, for participating tonight and offering your feedback. We will have a brief presentation and overview introduction to the zoning ordinance, and then we will be moving into the workshop portion of the event later this evening. So my name is Kelly Davis. I am planning director with the Berkeley Group. The Berkeley Group is a local government consulting firm that's headquartered here in Virginia, and we assist local governments and localities, just like Page County, in a variety of tasks, and including expertise in local government planning work. So we develop comprehensive plans, we develop zoning ordinances, and we can assist in a wide array of different planning and zoning functions, among other ways that we assist localities. Most of our staff actually have worked in localities, so we've sat in Tracy's shoes and talked with citizens in our own localities in the past, so we can bring both experience from an administrator's perspective, as well as having worked across Virginia and other localities as well. So we are here today to facilitate this process, to hear from you. We are at the very beginning of this zoning ordinance update. It's going to be a long process. We will go over that full schedule with you and let you know how you can stay involved and stay informed through this process. So with that, I'm going to introduce my team here. I've got Melissa, who will be leading the presentation tonight, and I've got Darla here as well, and both of them have a vast amount of zoning experience, and we're excited to be able to bring that here to you, to Page County. We're going to take just a quick moment, actually, to go around the room as well, since there's not too many people here, and just introduce everybody that's here so we can have a sense of who's here and just what's kind of driving you, what brought you here tonight. So if I can start here with you, sir.
Paul, interested citizen.
Great, thank you.
Tom Sampson, the interested citizen living in Deerfield Estates subdivision.
Evelyn Sutcliffe, interested citizen.
I'm Catherine Dweck. I'm an interested citizen, also a member of the Planning Commission.
Joe Winslow, I just live here in Blue Ray.
Gary Kimberly, interested citizen and a board member of HOA.
Beth Snyder, interested citizen.
Liz Lewis, Page County Economic Development.
Jared Marr, member of the Planning Commission.
John Ware, resident of Stanley.
Rick Higgs, interested citizen.
William Turner, District 5, Planning Commission.
Susan Corbett, my family owns Rivers Bend Ranch, very interested citizens.
Yeah, Charles Newton, live in Ida Valley, and am like the director of the Soil and Water Conservation District.
Great, thank you. And just so that folks are aware, maybe if our board members and administrators that are here would like to introduce yourselves as well.
Alan Allen, District 2.
Larry Falls, District 4.
Amy Tomower, I'm your county administrator. Gina Miller, your assistant county administrator.
I'm Morgan Phoenix, elected chair at large.
And last but not least, sir, we're doing introductions.
I'm Clyde Humphrey, local citizen.
Great, thank you. You can take a seat. All right, well, thank you so much for all of that.
I'm Chris Anderson. I'm with the Alliance for the Shenandoah Valley, and I'm the Page and Warren County Coordinator.
Thank you. With that, I'll turn it over to Melissa.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You keep the lights. Hope you guys see them slide a little there and dim the lights. As Kelly said, we're in the beginning of the Page County Zoning and Subdivision Ordinance update. which is, pretty extensive process, and this is the beginning. The public input helps us guide what direction we want to move in as we go through this process. Struggling here trying to see and talk with my mask on. I'm going to try to talk as loud as I can. I think I need to take this off in order to project. So the agenda for tonight will be, we're going to go over a general zoning overview for those of you who don't really quite understand what zoning is. We're going to do a small group exercise, which will help you tell us what your issues are with the zoning. And then we'll report out and we'll talk about the next steps of this process. This is the general guide for this overall process. We've already had a kickoff meeting with the Board of Supervisors and the Planning Commission. We had stakeholder interviews today where we met with different groups and interviewed them about their interaction with the zoning ordinance, what their experience has been through their businesses, things like that. Right now, we're in the public input workshop. After this, start to draft the ordinance. There will then be a public open house where the public will come and look at the ordinance that we have drafted and make comments on that. We'll do final revisions, and then we'll go through the hearing and adoption process. So why is your input important? Because this ordinance affects your community and it affects you. The public input is a cornerstone of planning, and you know and understand the issues that impact your county. So whether you're developing land, you're building a house, you want to start a business, or if you're just a neighbor to someone who is, the laws that are in the zoning ordinance affect you. Unlike many other lawmaking processes in government, planning actually allows the general public to be directly involved in this process. So, and although the final language is filtered through your representatives, your board of supervisors, and your planning commission, your comments and ideas definitely guide what direction we go in this process. So what does zoning do exactly? It determines land use that is allowed on a property. So whether it's commercial, residential, industrial, it determines building size, location, relationship to the surroundings. It protects natural agriculture, historic and cultural resources, and it's outlined on a zoning map. So we have those zoning maps on the wall for you all, and we also have copies at the tables for you to look at your current zoning and what the districts are for the zoning currently. And then, of course, as everything, you have to be in compliance with state code. So this gives a little overview of the way ordinances work. Your comprehensive plan, which you've adopted in the last year, was, you went through that process. I'm sure a lot of you were involved in that. And that sets out your policy and sets your visions and goals for the community for the future. Well, that document guides your regulations. So that guides the zoning ordinance and the subdivision ordinance, which we're also talking about tonight because we're going to roll both of those ordinances together into one document to make it a little easier for you and for Tracy and for everyone to understand and to follow. So the zoning ordinance regulates, again, the use of land and structures, height, area, location, ensures light, air, convenience, safety, facilitates public services and amenities, protects from destruction, obstruction, encroachments, dangers, and adverse impacts. Whereas the subdivision ordinance, it deals with when you divide land, when you're splitting land, selling it, or giving it to family. It regulates the number and size of your divisions, the standards for those divisions. It ensures the development is completed. It provides standards for adequate streets and right-of-ways, utilities, services and drainage. And it actually protects buyers from unsound development because it ensures that those things are done. So why update? Why do we want to change? Well, again, to comply with state code. We would also like to clarify the language. We've heard that already, that some of the components of the ordinance are a little bit hard to follow, or in certain situations they're hard to understand. The interpretation is gray, it has a gray area to it. We want to address modern issues. As things change, the regulations need to change. Things come up that didn't used to exist. or new issues, people are doing different things than they used to do, so we need to address those issues. Some people think we need to consider making the zoning a little more flexible. And again, we're going to incorporate those subdivision regulations into this one document to make it easier. And then revise the compatibility with your new comprehensive plan. Because as I said before, that plan is what guides this whole process. So what's in your zoning ordinance right now? Basically, you have areas that are delineated on a map that are called districts. And those are what you see on the map with the different colors. You have permitted uses in each of those districts. You have uses that are by right. So that means they're automatically allowed. They're listed in the ordinance. You are allowed to do these things. Then you have special use uses, special use permit uses. So you would need to seek a special permit to be able to do those uses, and they may place a little higher standard on you. Then you have district standard charts, which those help. It's a chart that is included in the ordinance that it just tells exactly what is allowed in the different districts and outlines things like setbacks, and it makes it a little easier than reading all of the text documents. We have copies of your district standards if you want to refer to those during this process. They're not quite updated, I think Tracy said, so there may be a few flaws in them. We'll be updating that with this process as well. And then you have your supplementary regulations. So in your ordinance, you have different sections for many different kinds of uses. And we have the charts of those. And in the back too, if you'd like to look at those, I have it on this next couple of slides, and we'll look at exactly what those are. Those sections actually require greater standards for things that need a greater standard, for things like shooting ranges or something like that don't automatically just fit into the other uses. So here is your districts map, the way they are right now. Oops. You've got your park and recreation, and the main purpose of that is, this is from your ordinance, this language, is to protect and preserve recreational land. You've got your woodland conservation. That's to perpetuate the rural atmosphere, open space, and scenic landscape of the area. And the purpose is to conserve natural resources. You've got your ag area, which is to preserve the character of the area, where primary use is ag and low intensity use, and is intended for low intensity and low density development. You've got your residential areas. Those are designed to promote and encourage residential development, which will blend with the existing development and create appropriate living environments. And I will point out that you only have one residential district. So some counties and localities have multiple levels of residential. There'll be more dense, less dense, things like that, but Page County only has the one. The same with commercial. Some counties and localities have multiple levels of commercial that would be more, business or office space, or as opposed to retail. But you just have that one district. And it's intended to provide areas for general business that is accessed frequently and directly, but not characterized by heavy trucking. That's what your ordinance says. And it's to provide services, also to provide services for visitors and tourists, because you have a lot of those. Then you have your industrial district, and that permits industries that do not detract from residential desirability, that's what it says, while regulating height, emissions, noise, and other environmental impacts by those industries. Then you have an ag and forestal district. This is a voluntary program more than a zoning district, but it is referenced in the zoning map. So that is on the maps the overlay on the maps on your table and on the one on the wall. There is some of that, I think, southeast of Luray. And you have a new zoning district for manufactured home parks. But I don't believe there are any in the county yet, but there is that district designated to allow for that. This is what your district use standard chart looks like. So it has, like I said before, it has the permitted uses, the permitted accessory uses in that district, the setbacks, the height restrictions and things like that for each one of those. There's kind of an at-a-glance guide to each district. It's pretty helpful. Then you have your supplementary regulations. So this is a list of the different sections in your ordinance that have very specific guidelines. So, and we have those back there. I can read through them. I know you can't read them. It's things like home occupations, shopping centers, signs, the floodplain conservation. Your floodplain ordinance is actually one of those sections. You've got specific regulations for things like motor sport facilities and shooting ranges, self-storage facilities, wind energy. So each of those things has a separate section in your ordinance. So if you were to come into the office and you wanted to open one of these businesses, you wouldn't just look in the permitted use section. You would need to look at that specific section to see exactly what you needed to do in order to be in compliance. Those are very helpful for unusual uses. So what's in your subdivision ordinance? As I kind of touched on before, the subdivision ordinance is based on what you need to do in order to divide land. So the restrictions for subdivisions are broken down by purpose and time of your division. So the regulations depend on what you're doing with it, if you're selling it or if you're gifting it to a child, and when you're doing it, because you can only divide lands a certain number of times in a 5-year period. So it depends on when you're dividing, the location, because there's some different guidelines for different zoning districts. The size and number would matter. So, for instance, less than 25 acres can be exempt sometimes. The impacts are also considered. So what is the proposed use? Are you going to need road utilities? Is it on a slope? Is it in a floodplain? So all these things are considered in the subdivision ordinance. And then you have standards for the development of that divided land. So things like the exact survey plat standards, what needs to be on that survey when the surveyor completes it. Where are your easements and access right-of-ways, and then your infrastructure requirements, so public water, sewer, things like that. So you may be asking, how do your concerns fit into this? Basically, you tell us your concerns tonight, and then we will address your concerns by proposing revisions to those permitted uses, special uses, district standards, supplementary regulations, the district areas, and the subdivision requirements. So we're not thinking that you all know this ordinance so well that you think you know exactly. My concern is this, and I know exactly where the ordinance, it says this, and we want to change it to that. You tell us what your concerns are, and we'll figure out where to change the ordinance. So that brings us to your exercise for tonight, that you all have a sheet on the table there for a group exercise, and it has 5 questions on it. We do have time limits on each question, so we would like you to work together as a group on these questions. We'll turn the lights back on. So the basic is, we want you to discuss the priorities, your concerns, prioritize those, and then look at a list of concerns and design elements that we've given you, and tell us what your concerns are with those, and then identify any areas of the map that you think should be open for change for district, like whether it needs to be changed from ag to commercial, or from commercial to ag, or whatever you think the change needs to be. So I hope you can all get close enough to work as a group on this. We want to have one person to kind of be the secretary for each group and get the responses down, that we'll report back every group's answers here shortly. So you guys can go to it. If you want to come up and join one of the tables, or
So we got about 60 minutes to move through this, and we will keep track of the time and allow you, we'll give you a little update of when,
That's all I really have.
and if you guys have any questions or want any of the other information, just raise your hand.
All right. Well, I'm kind of torn because I want to tape, but I also want to participate.
Okay.
So you guys seem to, you wrapped up a while ago. You've had some time to think about your interest, so why don't you start us out?
Okay, we started out with, the first issue was that the present ordinances are not very good at enforcing trash that might build up on lots out in the countryside. And I think that Tracy came by and said, yeah, that's some, oh no, it was Melissa that came by and said, yes, that was an issue that she was already aware of. Then we talked about needing to have some commercial zones along US 340 near where the town growth areas are. And let's see what else. We had concerns about not allowing the towns to sprawl out into the countryside, so that kind of worked with, having the commercial zone close to where the town is already. Talked about protecting karst aquifers by limiting residential use outside of the towns, or at least encouraging that to be more in the town than out in the country. The need for low and moderate income housing, guiding future growth of town growth areas, okay. Limiting large subdivisions in rural areas. We've already got a whole bunch of them out there. I don't think we need more. Require, okay,
Could you repeat that one for me, please? Limiting?
large subdivisions in rural areas. And these was kind of question 1 and 2. We,
Kind of blended them together.
yeah, we weren't sure what the difference was between those 2 questions. Is that a good place to stop?
Yes.
Okay.
So the next group, about number 1, over here.
Okay.
Okay, it is here.
Well, we had a pretty engaging discussion on all of our topics. And we figured for number 1, and we didn't really place a priority on any of these. They're kind of equally important. Protection of agricultural land and forested land. Environmental concerns, keeping illegal dumps and landfills regulated and off of private property. Guiding growth towards the towns and protecting open space. And protecting water quality in our karst geology. Is that captured?
What was the last thing you said, protecting water quality where?
In our karst geology,
Okay.
so with caverns and sinkholes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so let Darla catch up here.
Let me make sure I got you. You got protect agricultural and forestal areas, environmental protections, water quality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, water quality in karst geology. And guiding growth towards the towns and protecting open space. And does ag and forestal areas, that's a specific thing. We were talking about agricultural land and forested land in general. So like an ag and forestal district is its own specific thing. So I think we were talking more general.
Okay.
Okay.
Liz, you guys want to go in the back?
Yes. I can't see your Top priority was preserve open space, concentrate concentrate development, residential and commercial, around the towns, protect the view sheds, preserve ag and woodland conservation lands, preservation of historic structures. And under the comments, more discussion, appropriate siting for development of projects, more residential districts. We had a lot of conversations about density, levels of density in residential and levels of density in ag districts. And right-of-way, better defined right-of-ways, highways, right? Road use, is that where we were going with that one? Did I get that? Did I capture that? Maybe?
Roadways that are designed to current VDOT standards and right-of-way on property.
There we go.
The residential district standards, is that what you're talking about?
No, you have a problem right now where if a farmer wants to sell his property and a builder wants to build low, medium income housing or single-family homes, in a lot of cases, they can't do that because they can't get water and sewer lines to the property to do that because the owners upstream of him have their property go all the way out to the road. So there is no right of way to run associated utilities, whether it's electric, gas, water, and sewage. So then you have to negotiate with every property owner to allow them to work on your land, to bring that stuff in. And that's a problem. And then a lot of the roads do not conform to VDOT. So if they don't conform to VDOT, you can't even start the development until the road is corrected and meets VDOT standards.
Right, okay. We've heard that. Okay. Next group, number one.
Well, the most important thing for us is the preservation of ag land, protecting the scenic entrance corridors, encouraging homeowners to build, encourage homeowners in building of properties for people to come here that enjoy the area and will appreciate coming to this area because it's a beautiful area. And we also had an issue with the trash and the junkyards and
the last word,
the handling of the trash and also the junkyards.
And the one before that, did you get that one?
The view sheds, protecting the view sheds. That was all numbered.
Yes, protecting view sheds, and I added to that entrance corridors.
Okay.
But encouraging home ownership and relocation to the county by people.
Okay.
Yeah.
That is what I did get.
Yeah. Home ownership and new home development, which builds upon the rural quality of Payne County.
And the rural character, but we had that in number 2. So, we got confused with number 1 and 2, so we would like to point that out for future workshops.
So we'll take that into consideration. All right, the last table here, what was the number 1 answers you had?
Okay, our subdivision specifically is, there's no area reserved for like green area for kids to go out and do certain things like ride their dirt bikes and golf carts or whatever they're always riding around. There are a lot of drainage problems. There's no street lights. Homeowners Association is loosely formed, and they need to improve the subdivision. And then there's encroachment areas and standards in the subdivisions, and also in looking into preserving the agricultural and tourism jobs.
Okay. Did you get the homeowners association one? I don't think we've heard that
That's what I was asking about that one again.
Yeah, just, can you read that one for specific?
The subdivision, it's, there's no area reserved for like green area.
I did get that one.
Yes, okay. There's, they should look more into, but they're building on farmland because of drainage problems, and no streetlights. The homeowners association is loosely formed,
That's
And
the
approve
one.
the subdivision.
The homeowners associations are loosely formed.
Yeah.
And that is definitely something we've heard.
Yes.
All right. Have you caught up with us, Darla?
I have, I believe.
Okay, good. You're pretty good. Okay, so,
I ran out of room, so things are getting smaller, but we're capturing everything, that's the important part.
it sounds like there's definitely some recurring patterns in there.
Yes.
And we will, take the sheets that you guys have written on with us so we can make sure we get that input correct. But we kind of just wanted you all to hear each other's answers was the point of this exercise, to put it on the wall. So, do you want to start with number 2? Well, this group's already given you 1 and 2. If anyone had separate answers for number 2, then you can tell us what those are.
It's a separate answer for number 2.
Okay.
Strict development standards that prevent negative impacts on natural resources. A balance between development on open space, which we're looking at, ag, woodland conservation, and the forest. An impact of development on community services. So we had a lot of discussions about infrastructure, community services, schools, and those concerns. Sewer, water, public sewer, water.
The impact of development on those?
Yes.
Okay.
So if it's, if it's a densely proposed project, how does that impact community services?
Okay.
And repeat the second one for me again, I'm sorry.
Second one, balance between development on open space. So we looked at open spaces, of course, the ag, woodland conservation, and the forested areas.
Next group.
So we had to retain the natural beauty and rural character of the area. Conservation of the view sheds. Again, we found this, the common denominator was the automobile graveyards and junkyards and stuff. And that we'd like to see the subdivisions kept closer to town because of the water and the sewer and all
You
that.
said subdivision development?
Yeah, the subdivisions kept closer,
Kept closer to towns.
closer to town.
Last group there? Oh, you had kind of joined the 1 and 2 together, okay.
We had a couple of different ones for number 2. Addressing the number of accessory buildings on property that's zoned agricultural, and maintaining visual protection of the commercial corridor, and lighting on commercial properties, and maintaining the dark skies initiative standards.
Okay. Did you guys talk about that one too at some point?
We do.
Mm-hmm, we do, yep.
All right. So, again, it's a lot of the same topics have come up, and we want to assure you all that we are definitely looking at the junk issue. Tracy's very aware of the problems that are exist in the current ordinance, and we'll be looking at those and hoping to help you guys tighten that up a little bit and take care of that. So, question number 3. You guys want to go?
So this was where there were concerns, right? Okay, so minor concern, but we have a lot of rental cabins that end up being vacant in the off-season. Yeah.
Were you thinking that those could be full-time rentals, or you just the vacancy was the concern?
Yeah, we're also short of, don't know if we talked about this before, yeah, the need for low and moderate income housing, and we definitely have a need for housing. I'm not saying that the Airbnbs and the guest houses are the place to do that, but notice the two things. Tiny houses, we said, well, if it meets the building codes and you can get good water, sewer, and that sort of thing, why not write something that would allow for that possibility? Obviously, you need restrictions on junkyards, and as far as ag, rural preservation, preserve the land with good ag soils for ag use.
So the prime ag.
Yeah, the good soils that are of statewide importance.
Yep.
Or
That's definitely, we haven't heard that before, but that is definitely important to point that out, that there's
farmers
prime
didn't raise
soils.
that issue this morning?
Not, we didn't, I guess it's just kind of a given with the
Yeah,
farmers.
they assume you're gonna protect that.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I put ag preservation. Should I elaborate on that?
To put the prime soil in particular.
Okay. For number 3, home occupations, there was some concern about the number of signs. If it's a commercial business, deliveries, number of deliveries, limit the number of employees, hours of operations, continue with the special use permits with the existing oversight, seems to be working. Guest houses and short-term rentals, Airbnb, no problem. Agritourism, we're all for it. Wineries, breweries, that's kind of agritourism, or it is agritourism. Same thing, we agreed about tiny houses, it's a way to address lower income residential needs, potentially, as long as they meet the codes and health requirements. Junkyards definitely need oversight and to regulate them. The ordinance needs to be reworded and tightened and enforced. Agricultural/rural preservation, it is of high importance. It's an asset that makes Page County unique. Commercial uses, consider balance of jobs created with what type of commercial/industrial use is proposed. It's not been a problem so far, so it seems to be working. The company would have to demonstrate good stewardship of the property and be of benefit to the county as a whole. So we kind of combine commercial and industrial.
Let Darla catch up on that one. So for the tiny homes, I could wait till we hear everyone's response, but also just have a question did you discuss whether you think those are appropriate everywhere, or did you have discussions about whether you think they're appropriate in tiny home communities only, or?
Well, we didn't really discuss that. Do y'all have a feeling on it? I guess it's a new thing, so we
Right.
haven't really encountered it.
We were discussing that a little bit with this group, we kind of said, it's not that they were opposed to them, but most of the time, when I've seen them, they've been in their own small, tiny home communities, as opposed to spread around, just general, use for general housing. So I just wondered if anybody had any specific thoughts on that.
I kind of see it both, though. Like you hear grandmother homes, like a little house behind the main house where an elder can maintain their sense of independence in life, but still have autonomy.
So you were thinking of using those as like the accessory dwellings?
Well, we didn't really discuss it, but I think it could work.
Yeah. We'll see what everybody else has to say on the tiny homes. Liz, you guys want to?
Yeah, on home occupations, that was a low priority for us. We're like, yeah, that's okay. On guest house short-term rentals, we even had an issue with like, what's a guest house, what's a short-term rental? So the better definition of what a short-term rental is in our code would be would be helpful, and what those standards are according to what types of rentals those are defined as. And then under that, a better definition of those regulations, like occupancy regulations, or, if you're on a septic system and you over-occupy the property, should that be addressed somewhere? Ag tourism, we looked at that as like pick your own and pumpkin patches, so we were like, just not high commercial use on that kind of land use. Wineries, breweries, distilleries, we just thought low impact use, where we see those would be appropriate. Tiny homes, we thought residential was okay, but we also said no wheels exposed, so it looks like a permanent structure. Junkyards, we talked a lot about street screening and standards, keep them away from the rivers, separate area for tires. Of course, not in residential areas, so make it a kind of in a commercial area with restrictions. Huge priority was agricultural and rural preservation. Commercial uses, we looked at those as like the wedding venues, and we said they were appropriate in designated areas with appropriate, zoning restrictions. And industrial use, our real comment was waste stream contamination. That's what we had there.
And I'm gonna add railroad access.
Tell me about the waste.
Waste stream contamination. So be cognizant of that.
All right, for home occupations, we all felt that we're okay with it within reason and limits to noise and junk, traffic, the regular thing. Nobody wants to live next to, something noisy. Guest houses, it kind of depends on where they are. If they're in the subdivisions, they can sometimes overtax those areas, and you've got a lot of people coming in and out. So I guess they need to have regulations as to what those are. Agritourism, we looked at that as like orchards, farm stores, pick your own stuff, and we're all for it. I think there should be more of that here. Brings people in, charming. Same with the wines and the breweries and distilleries. People like to come here to enjoy that stuff. Now the tiny houses, we looked at those like they would be the manufactured home parks, or like trailer, like as part of a trailer park, more than in a regular subdivision.
Okay, so you were thinking like what I was saying, like communities.
Yeah.
Thinking they would be more in their own little community.
Yeah, with restrictions on how far they could be apart, or with restrictions, and I guess they would need to be kind of close to town for the water and sewer issues. The junkyards, we think they should be kept out of the subdivisions and the residential areas. Should have appropriate fencing and regulation. Agriculture, rural preservation, very important, high priority. So the commercial uses, which we were looking at as the service-based or buildings and stuff, we think they should be limited to the already commercial areas. There's an awful lot of abandoned buildings in town, all through town. Maybe have some incentives to bring those up to code. Maybe some people that either own them now be required to bring them up to code, or to sell them to somebody that will bring them up to code and make them viable businesses again. We need businesses in town. There's already all those spaces. Why bring in more or designate more commercial area when we have all this that is not being used? And then the industrial, you need to be careful about where you put industrial and the impact it has to environmental area and the river and all that. And perhaps keep those along the same corridors that they're already in, utilize some of the spaces of the abandoned areas now.
So that's something new, is the redevelopment of towns. So if the county can somehow coordinate with the towns to figure out how much vacant commercial properties is in town, you can better figure out how much more commercial you might need outside the towns.
Right, because they could offer in tax breaks. If you go down to the main area of town, there's tons of empty buildings.
And home occupations, it would be rules on acres, and license the board. The guest house would be, like zoning issues, whether they should be allowed in residential areas. Short-term rentals would especially create problems with people going in and out all the time. Agritourism is protect agricultural areas. There is a shortage of extending agricultural. And then wines and breweries would welcome addition to the tourism as long as soil is fit for it. In tiny houses where they could be restricted to, like RV parks, etc. And that they, not to be built in subdivisions near a 2,000 square foot home where it's going to bring down the value. In junkyards, we thought that they had pretty good regulations on them. In the agricultural rural preservation, we were all in favor of it. That's why people moved here. In commercial uses was you to, not on farmland, and to encourage it to be more compatible with town, like the town and the college, for the college coming into the town and stuff. And then industrial uses would be biotech businesses, etc., and nanotech technologies.
I didn't quite understand the one about the college.
Encourage, with the college that's coming in, it's gonna bring more, use for things in here, for children and stuff.
Retain the young people.
Yes.
That's a
Work
positive.
with industry,
Yes.
Coordinate commercial and industrial growth programs.
Oh, okay. Did you get that, Darla?
Yeah.
The college.
To coordinate the programs at the college.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good thought. All right. Again, there's, recurring themes that we're all seeing, I think,
Yes.
that are the obvious things that we need to address. So, what's the question number 4?
Community design elements.
Okay, the design elements. Okay. You guys want to start again?
By this point in our discussions, we were a little bit fragmented. We agreed that signs definitely need size limits and some design guidelines, but we didn't have a lot of details to
Okay.
provide. Most of the commercial areas are close to towns, where the town would be the one to deal with the landscaping. But yes, landscaping is useful in commercial areas. Certainly, with buffering, you want to try to avoid conflicts between different types of use. That's just basic planning. You try to separate the different types of land use where you can and create buffers where you end up with some that are close to each other. And sometimes that's fencing or screening, sometimes it's landscaping, sometimes it's other spacing issues.
Were there anything, instances discussed where you thought, oh, this particular thing really could have used more buffering, or?
Did anybody?
No?
I'm
Just
sorry.
in general?
We'll have to hope the other groups come up with some examples.
You guys were getting tired by that point?
Yeah.
Okay, for number 5, we looked at the map and saw the growth area. Oh, 4. Community character and design. We thought that limiting the number of ground signs and wall signs was important, and restrict the size and height of them, and restrict those digital LED signs. They don't belong in our rural kind of character for our county. Landscaping in commercial areas. We thought that a certain percentage of landscaping should be required per a certain amount of square footage of impervious surface. So have it balanced, and use native species. Shrubs and trees should be native. Buffering between land uses. Generally felt that the current zoning is sufficient.
Our turn? Okay. On signs, we thought a sign study, conduct the signs and be concerned with illuminated signs, the whole dark sky issue has been mentioned a couple times. Landscaping in commercial areas, we saw that as a priority. There should be a set of design standards. Natural vegetation is preferred with trees and planting schemes. Let's see, buffering between land uses, we thought natural buffers were our preference. Priority was a basic ordinance. We determined, one layer of buffering, and then based on the project, you can choose your SUP for another layer of buffering, so you can kind of stagger it that way and protect neighbors. Noise concern and light concerns were also discussed under that topic. Fencing and screening, we discussed it appropriate to development based on the project. Of course, we always recommended trees planted. I can't read my handwriting. We talked about berms, which we thought was a different alternative to fencing, and maybe, berms cover the fencing, so it makes it more appealing, especially if you think about the corridors that we were discussing earlier. Did I miss anything? I'm having a hard time reading my handwriting.
All right, so I guess with signs, size matters, location, size, restrict them. Landscaping and commercial areas, we decided we thought it needs to be regulated and promote the pristine rural character of the county. Buffering should have the buffering between land uses like commercial, there should be significant buffering between those two types of land types. The buffering, the setbacks, especially along the entry corridors, they should be buffered. Fencing need ordinance and better regulated in terms where they are needed. Like a chain link fence won't make you not see a junkyard. We also agreed plant more trees, maybe incentivize planting of trees. I mean, Page County's best asset is its rural character. That should be protected above everything else.
In terms of all those like screenings and things like that.
In terms of everything,
Yeah.
and the growth, everything.
Yeah, we definitely heard that in all these answers, I think. Okay, last group there.
Okay, signs, commercial area lighting and signs should be downshield and limited. Landscaping, commercial areas, site plan ordinance in favor of it in large parking lots. Buffering between land uses, concerns on how it is to be determined in the buffering zones and setback requirements. And fencing and screening permit requiring, special permit use requirements for the fencing and screening. And then others, lighting, pollution, security, lighting, shining in windows, etc., security, light down shield, and the site plan ordinance for commercial growth is relinking it.
I think that's a new one that we haven't heard before is greater site plan requirements. former planning commissioner on that. Okay. So we are down to the possible map revisions. If Darla's caught up.
I am.
Caught up?
I am.
Good. So I think as you all can hear, you know, you're all thinking along the same lines and have the same goals. I think it's pretty clear the areas that we need to work on. So let's talk about if you want to see any changes in the districts, your land use, your zoning map changes that you talked about. So, I know.
Starting here with us. we
Yeah.
Basically thought that if you take the present zone where the towns are and you use the future land use map for the orange areas, primary growth areas would be the place where we want to put future commercial or industrial development. Try to put it where the water and the sewer and the other utilities are already available. As opposed to, I think I heard one person mention, it was one of your group, that said, well, there was some discussion about having, where there might be a little cluster of houses out in the rural areas. Well, no, that area doesn't have water and sewer and the things that you really need for commercial and industrial development. So much better to put it near the towns.
Just 3 main towns, okay?
Okay, so now, number 5. We looked at the map and the existing zoning and felt like the growth area along Highway 211 West was pretty good. But we felt like all of the commercial, industrial development and residential to a certain point should be context-sensitive design, so maintain a sense of place in architecture, signage, lighting, landscaping, etc. Maintain the rural character of the county tastefully with careful planning. Like we were thinking about Williamsburg, everything is kind of the same. None of the signs are too high, and the architecture is all of a cohesive style. There was some concern over the subdividing of land, farmland, and for homes, like family homes. And is this correct that maybe 5 years is a little too restrictive?
Thought that I'd get out a little bit.
So maybe something to consider.
So you brought up something new there that we talked about earlier today, and that was the design standards. So what you're saying is you think growth is appropriate in the growth areas already established, but you would also like to see some design standards. So
Yes.
to consider what things look like. Do they fit in with the character of the county?
Right.
Okay.
And entrances for commercial development, to have landscaping in the front so that there's a visual screen, and then you drive into the parking lot, and the commercial area is not right on the road, so you maintain a sense of the lush greenery that we have in the county.
Gotcha. No, good. Liz?
All right, avoid woodland conservation and river development, as I priority discussed. Same as group 1, cluster development around the towns. We're concerned about density and the availability of services. And the other thing that was discussed is consistent development. So keep your commercial with your commercial, keep your industrial with your industrial. Don't have it kind of haphazard around the county.
And you need to do something about railroad access for industrial. If you want industrial, you'll have to do something about making a railroad stop, offshoot, something. Especially if you want to have an impact on the economic opportunity zone money.
Okay.
We went back to the whole idea that the buildings that are in town should be fixed up. There's a lot of cool buildings in town already, and fix up all that before you give room to a lot of further spread. We did talk about it should be near the railroad too, adjacent to the city limits. And if it was gonna be a big thing like a home improvement store or something, then it would go back there near Walmart, back in that kind of industrial area that's already, or the commercial, a high commercial area that's already back there. But we really thought it was a good idea to fix up stuff that's already out there. There's a lot of abandoned buildings.
So you guys talk a lot about reuse and revitalization. That's good. Okay.
We talked mainly about the need to attract new commercial and industrial uses to the area to provide jobs for the local residents. But we felt that it was important that those uses be concentrated in and around the town. We felt that the best place for new commercial and industrial would be along the main arteries of the three towns, but within the primary and secondary growth tiers. So that it would be, and those primary and secondary growth tiers are based upon the extent of municipal sewer and or water to the areas around the town. And that's where the commercial and industrial growth should be challenged. And that it would be probably advantageous to have some speculative commercial industrial zonings in those areas so that it's ready for anybody who wants to come.
And that's something that, I didn't hear from any of the rest of you, well, probably because we were talking about that specifically, but what do you other groups think about who wanted any new commercial, even if it's within that boundary? What do you think about going ahead and zoning that commercial? So it's automatically zoned that. You don't have to get a special use permit to start a business there. It's already zoned for the business. Do you think that that's the direction that you would want to move in? Or do you want to leave it like it is to where you have to get special use permits for most commercial businesses? We were calling it speculative zoning because you would go ahead and zone a particular area and you all agree that it should be along those corridors within those areas. But the question still remains, do you want to go ahead and zone it commercial so it's ready, or just when someone wants to do something commercial, then you look at rezoning or a special use permit? Any thoughts on that? Sure.
I like the idea of trying to reuse buildings, and so you might want to say, if there's no current building that can be revamped to satisfy the need of a new industry, then they could go to this new area. But I really love this idea of trying to, because I see this in a lot of places in the country, where an area has been built and then it's been abandoned and then things have just gone out and then the center is dead. And I mean, there's some huge tannery, the old tannery building. There's some enormous buildings that have been abandoned, and I think that we start there, before we open up New Frontier here. I think we start by trying to say, if the company's coming in, let's look at what's available and see if we can't go there first. And then if that absolutely, because I know some of these buildings, because my parents own 3 of them, they're old and they have asbestos and lead paint. There's a lot of stuff that the wiring's bad. I've still got a building with a fuse box in it. So I understand that, but I really believe that we should try that first before you just open up a New Frontier road. See if we can't revitalize and reuse some of these buildings downtown in cities which we do that.
What about the other groups too, that, You have, are you know, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that you need this speculative? Or would you rather just leave it like it is and wait for the opportunity that's, you know, that comes up? Someone wants to then rezone a property at a time, or give special use permits one at a time?
So I think the land needs to be available for commercial use. If you don't know, the potential builder does not know that it's there, that's one hindrance to bringing someone else in. But also, the special use permits would at least give you an opportunity to address concerns at that time. That's kind of a twofold thing. You need to have the area zoned to attract the business, but you still need to have a quote-unquote special use permit for that business to start there.
So have, you could possibly address that with standards that were automatically, you know, applied to that district instead of the special use permit. That's a different way to do that, but I understand what you're saying, yeah.
There needs to be a conversation with the current landowner. I mean, you can't just go in and force somebody to rezone their property. If they don't want to rezone it, they don't have to. I mean, you just make them aware of the situation. What would be, I mean, even if they're in the current growth zone, if they don't want to rezone to say commercial or industrial and they're zoned ag, you can't go in and force them.
Right. Definitely be issues with that.
It does definitely take a lot of planning for the towns that have the utilities to see how far they're able to, you know, economically expand and on what kind of schedule. So it's a big planning exercise to get into that.
Yes.
With the potential that you're enriching one particular landowner or, you know, so it's tricky. I'm not saying it's not worth looking at. I think it is, but boy, it's a tricky thing.
Yeah, we believe it's tricky. And I mean, overall, I mean, does anyone else have any comments on that issue?
Well, like he was saying, would you just go in and change everybody's zoning? I mean, how would that work? If somebody had a house there and they're living in it and all of a sudden they're living in a commercial property, how does that affect their taxes? How does that affect their resale value? How does that affect?
It's a huge process, yes, there's definitely a lot.
I mean, if you were living in a house, would you like somebody to come and say, hey, we know you live in this house, but now you live in a commercial property? Would you like that? I mean, I wouldn't like that.
The uses that are currently active wouldn't be prohibited. It was, you know, those would all be grandfathered in. But yes, it is a process, and it's just something that has been discussed in the meetings that we've been in, and we're just trying to get a feel for how many people think that that's a good idea. It's not that we're definitely planning to do that, but you know, it's come up multiple times.
Have they done that in other areas?
Some localities will do that, yes. So, and it always should align with your long-range comprehensive plan. But some localities will choose to align the zoning to their future land use map. And you can do that with timing, or you can just do it initiated by the county or the city, or you can choose to just allow it to come in on a case-by-case basis. So that's the real question there. But I will say that if there's a specific process that has to be followed, if that is chosen to do, that is strictly laid out in state code that requires notification of property owners, public hearings. So there'll be plenty of more additional discussions about that, but like Melissa said, it's just to start to gauge whether there was any appetite for that, or this group saw a need for much more commercial development in the community.
We went through one of these type of things with the creation of an industrial zone along the railroad tracks just north of Stanley many years ago, and a lot of people are still wondering if that was, you know, it didn't turn out quite the way everybody thought it was going to, put it that way.
That was speculative industrial zoning.
Yeah. And we still have it on our, you know, if you look there, just on the town of Stanley, that's our industrial.
We've had some discussion on that today. Did you have a comment?
Yeah, I have a comment on, this has to do with trying to keep some of the residential development close into the existing town, in and around the towns. And that is a thing called transfer of development rights, which they have in some counties. I think Albemarle is for one that has it. But where, instead of developing the countryside, that farmer can transfer his development rights to somebody else, and they get extra. They can put more density on their town land because they've gobbled up some development from the countryside. And so that's a way of, the farmer gets some extra money that he was going to lose because he didn't develop his land. But you're keeping that development in town where you have the services and sewer and water close by. So it's something to look at.
Right. It's an option that some rural communities choose that have a lot of, usually heavy development going on.
Right.
Choose to do that, yeah. So I think we need to wrap it up. I didn't realize it was so late. We've had some really good discussions. And I briefly wanted to touch on the final next steps. So, there's the website, and it's on the bottom of your agenda. So if you all want to keep in contact with what's going on with this project, please visit this site often. We'll have information from this workshop as well as the presentation on there, hopefully tomorrow. And here are our next steps. So after this, we're going to start drafting the actual document. We're going to be doing that for several months through fall and winter. During this time, we'll be doing work sessions with the Board of Supervisors and Planning Commission pretty much bi-monthly. We'll then have a public open house where we'll present the draft of the plan, and the community can then come to that and give comments again, read over the full plan of what's being proposed. After that, we'll incorporate the final revisions in the summer of 2021, and then you will go to the public hearing and the adoption hopefully by fall of 2021. So it's a lengthy process. There's a lot to consider, and we hope that you will all stay engaged. You can always contact Tracy with specific comments throughout the process, and we will put stuff on the website as we're going so you can keep up with what's happening. But we really appreciate your time and all your work tonight. We've got a lot of good information. I think we've got definitely have some themes to work with, to focus on with this update. So thank you all so much.
Thank you all.
We're just trying to get your